Good evening and welcome to the Week in Review. I'm Paris Schutz. We'll be joined by our Week in Review guests in just a moment, but first, some of today's top stories. The process of getting a Chicago casino is taking longer than anticipated. Mayor Lori Lightfoot announces the city will extend the deadline to receive bids from potential builders and operators of a potential Chicago casino. The city's request for proposals initially had an August 23rd due date, but will now be extended to October 29th. The mayor says she wants to give bidders more time to assess the opportunity and put together financing. And we'll have more on this a bit later in the program. And Illinois records its second straight day with more than 3,000 new COVID cases. State public health officials report 3,040 new cases in the last 24 hours and 13 deaths. Meanwhile, 59% of the state's 12-plus population is fully vaccinated at this point, with 67% receiving at least one dose. And public officials cut the ribbon on a new roller rink in West Garfield Park this afternoon. The rink is located on a formerly vacant lot at 400 West Madison Street and is part of the mayor's plan to activate areas to help bring down crime. The site will also have a public plaza and was built in conjunction with the Garfield Park Right to Wellness Collaborative. And now let's get to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Greg Hines of Crane Chicago Business, Greg Pratt of the Chicago Tribune, Mike Lowe of WGN-TV News, and Dion Miller of ABC7 Chicago, stuck in some of that Cubs Sox traffic on the north side. Let's get right to it. Governor J.B. Pritzker is mandating masking for schools in Illinois, as well as some state employees who work in congregate settings, such as long-term care facilities and prisons. Take a look.
We're doing this, I think, at the right time and making sure that as schools get back in session that we're limiting the spread, mitigating the spread.
Greg Pratt, are we likely to see some pushback from labor unions, parents of school children to these mandates?
Well, you'll definitely see pushback from some parents of school children. Some of the labor unions are in a tricky spot where I think most of the labor unions around this area understand the issue, but of course you have some members who, might not want to wear a mask, might not want to be vaccinated, and unions have to advocate for their members. That's their number one goal. But it's really remarkable that we're still in this mess, in no small part because people keep refusing to do what science tells them is pretty straightforward.
And cases really have exponentially risen in the last few weeks, both here and across the country. Greg Hines, the criticism from Republicans in the State House is that Pritzker is doing this again by what they say is executive fiat and not consulting or working with the legislature on regulations like this. Did they have a point there?
Not really, Paris. If he'd consulted with them, they would have said, no, don't do it. Let it be up to parents and local school districts to do it voluntarily. The problem is that, as Greg indicated a minute ago, the state's very split politically. A lot of people aren't following the science. It's become an instinctive reaction, and some people are just being real stubborn and won't do what needs to be done. So there's a little political risk to the governor, but I give him credit for making a kind of a gutsy decision here.
Mike Lowe, some businesses and other establishments in Chicago are doing what they believe needs to be done for their own organizations and starting to require proof of vaccination. Some of the concert venues, restaurants, bars. Do you expect to see lots of businesses in Chicago and the area following suit?
I think we're already seeing a number of businesses doing that, but Governor Pritzker was asked if we would revert back to, say, phase 4 protocols, for example. And he said, we're living in a different world now because of the tools. We have the vaccine. So he doesn't envision any mandates for businesses or capacity limits at this point. So it's basically going to be a case-by-case basis at this point, based on what the business feels is right.
Dion Miller, some of those organizations with big mass gatherings are professional sports teams, Cubs, Sox, Bears coming up. Do you get any indication from owners of those teams that they want to start instituting some kind of proof of vaccination or proof of negative test for fans coming through the gates?
Not at this point, although it is interesting to see how each team has their own kind of protocols, ways things are going. I know that the leagues do but you see far, like I was just coming from Wrigley Field and there was nary a mask in sight. Most of the people that work for the team are still wearing the masks because as far as we've been told, the Cubs are not at that 85% threshold that allows them to kind of loosen some of those protocols. The White Sox are. They were among one of the first teams to be more towards the fully vaccinated rate, and you see less masking among them, but of course that's more of an outside thing. The Bears are right now dealing with their own mini outbreak, I guess I would call it. They aren't requiring the vaccination. They're educating their players. It's pretty obvious which ones are and aren't vaccinated based on how they enter the media room and talk to us. We all as a media staff had to prove our vaccination to be able to enter the building. So it's going to be interesting to see how things continue to play out based on the way that the pandemic continues to spread throughout our country and our city.
Well, Deanna, and I want to stay with you here because, there was a little bit of controversy. The Minnesota Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins talking about he'd rather just have a plexiglass office than take the vaccine. How's it going to work with the NFL here if there are outbreaks?
I'm not sure. They don't want to cancel games because, God forbid, they lose any money in that realm. And so they're going to do whatever they can to make sure that the games are played. And this year they've added an extra one. So that's revenue that they want to get. And they feel like they lost a ton by not having fans there. So it's going to be interesting how they might accelerate things just to make sure that they make the money back. I mean, Jimmy Graham from the Bears was talking about, too, how frustrated he is that now he seems like we were almost forced to get this vaccine. And now I have. And now you're saying that you're going to fine me if I'm not tested more frequently than I even was last year. I mean, he has a valid argument. So it'll be interesting to see how their players' union fights back onto some of these protocols that the NFL is now trying to implement.
Speaking of labor unions, the NFLPA there, Greg Pratt, Mayor Lightfoot, and Dr. Allison Arwady said at this point they're not going to follow the lead of New York and require vaccination for any indoor activity like that city has. Do you anticipate that if these cases keep going up, they might change their thoughts on that?
Sure, if it becomes a full-blown crisis, of course they're going to change their mind on that. But in the meantime, they're not. The city of Chicago has been very, very strong on saying the right things and on urging caution. And they haven't been big on restrictions since last June. And so and by last June, I mean 2020. So it's, I don't anticipate that they're going to go out in that way like New York unless they absolutely have to because cases go really bad, and I think everybody is rooting against that.
Greg Hines, another part of the pandemic discussion here is the eviction moratorium. It expired in Illinois at the beginning of this month, but now President Biden and the CDC are talking about extending it, even though the president is saying he's not 100% sure whether courts would uphold the CDC's authority here. How do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I think they're going to go to court, and the president is probably going to lose in court, as he suggested. But in the meantime, with his base and with the people who are really concerned about this, he will have bought some time to maybe come up with a better solution to get some of the money. For instance, there's all kinds of money that's been passed on to the states to pass on to landlords who won't evict. But the problem is it's stuck somewhere in the bureaucracy. It hasn't gotten out there. This gives them a little more time to perfect that system. But I think given the Supreme Court decision on this, winning this case ultimately in court without specific congressional authorization is probably going to be tough.
So it's probably a situation of biding time right now as this works its way through the courts. Mike Lowe, we see cases, as we said, continuing to rise, the positivity rate across the state, 5%. Dr. Arwady, earlier this week said there's no Lala spike yet. I think it's too soon to really know that, but we're about 5-6 days out now. Do you anticipate seeing a Lala spike and these cases continue to go up?
Well, virtually every public health expert that we talked to said we are likely to see that. And I was at Lollapalooza covering it, and I can tell you that the checking of vaccination cards was cursory at best.
Even though the mayor bragged about 90% of folks were vaccinated, according to Lala organizers. But go ahead.
You have to take those numbers with a grain of salt if you saw exactly how they were checking for them. And pretty much you had to show a piece of paper and they'd wave you through. Still, they did have that check in place, and I think it was important to make sure that people who were coming at least got tested or went through the process so that they didn't fear getting kicked out. But I think we are likely to see a spike, though earlier this week, the mayor was talking about the economic benefits of holding Lollapalooza. So we'll have to see exactly how big the spike is, but I think we're likely to see an uptick in the numbers as we've seen happening already.
Economic benefits, although, you have news this week of some smaller festivals like the Hyde Park Festival shutting down because of concern over these rising cases. Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, though, Market Day is a big festival on the north side is going on. So it's not universal that all of these neighborhood festivals are canceling, though some of them are.
Yeah, Paris, if I could add a quick thought here, too. While I believe in following the science, health costs are not the only costs when a business goes out of business. Employees don't have money. People have trouble feeding their kids. Then maybe they get evicted. This is a balancing act, and I think officials in Illinois have probably done a pretty good job overall in balancing it, but it's tricky.
Deon Miller, are you more or less likely to go to an establishment if they say, well, we need you to show your proof of vaccination to come in here and eat or to listen to music, or does it make you more comfortable going to a place like that?
I think it honestly makes me a little bit more comfortable. I feel like I'm not afraid to say that I got the vaccine, and I'm not afraid to if someone asks me to see proof of that. I've had to do it many times already for work, just to be allowed to cover teams and do the job that I love to do. And so I don't think it's that crazy to ask that of people. I don't think it's going to deter me one way or another. It would make me feel better, but at the same time, I think you adhere any risk, no matter where we go and whatever viruses are out there, COVID or not. Like, I think that there's always a risk involved when you're gathering in a large crowd and not knowing where those people came from or where they stand on their vaccination.
We're certainly more aware of all those risks these days than we were maybe a couple years ago. Let's move on to some other political news. There was another cannabis lottery this week for folks that felt that it was unfair the last time around. The social equity applicants didn't get a fair shake. Greg Hines, has the state worked out all the kinks in this system yet?
I hope so, Paris, but honest answers we'll find out. I mean, this was a real mess. When the legal cannabis bill passed, there were all kinds of promises from the governor and top lawmakers that, we're not going to let the big old companies that gobble this stuff up get all the money. We're going to spread this out. We're going to give minority entrepreneurs a crack. Well, it didn't turn out that way for a variety of reasons. So this is take two for their sake and for our sake. I hope that it does, because this is a great example of the kind of stuff that Mayor Lightfoot's trying to do, which is spread the money around here, give everybody a chance to have a piece of the system so that they have a reason to be in it.
I'll throw this out to anybody, though, Greg. It's amazing to me that we have talk now of these winners might sell their licenses, and you might just have these big, giant, multi-state corporations come in and buy up what are supposed to be social equity licenses. Does anybody think that that's going to happen here, that people are going to win, they're going to be social equity applicants, and then they're going to turn around and sell their license?
Well, I'd just say that would be the American way. I guess that would give them some money, but I would hope not. But we'll see.
And just on that point, Ricky Hendon, it's been reported, who was kind of the voice of equity in all of this, has said he's gotten offers and he believes that he could sell the license that he got for somewhere between $3 to $5 million, I believe, though some experts believe that it would sell for much lower than that, somewhere between $1 and $3 million. But the offers are going to be there, and they're going to come from corporate interests and very wealthy people, not the people that the law was intended to provide these licenses to.
And why is the law permitting this? Why is it permitting this selling of licenses so that this happens so easily?
Well, this whole thing has, it's just as a general point on this, it's a great example of not believing the hype, where when the cannabis passed, we were talking about how Illinois had the most equitable law in the country. And it certainly wasn't very good at the time, in terms of getting out there. And it's still a major problem where you've got people selling with the option to sell it. Why that's in the bill, I don't actually know, but it certainly sounds goofy that you can get you can get it, but then you can sell it. I mean, goodness, what an oversight.
But as Mike Lowe brought up, if these offers are in the millions of dollars, and you're a winner here of this license, why not sell rather than dealing with all the trouble of owning a pot shop? And by the way, Greg, the mayor wants to expand the areas in the city where dispensaries can go. Is City Council likely to go along with that?
As long as it's not right in the heart of the central business district, yes. But I think the idea that right across from the headquarters of banks and major corporations and law firms, you could have a little a weed shop on the corner. That's kind of unpopular with the business committee. I think that there would be a big fight over that.
And they probably don't want it within schools or parks or anything like that. Greg Hines, we said earlier in the program tonight that the casino process is really slogging along. You had a report this week that there isn't much interest. Is that the case?
Well, it's hard to tell because the people who really know aren't talking. The city has been very quiet here. What we know is that the apparent front runner, the perceived front runner, is Neil Blum, whose daughter Leslie is very tight with Mayor Lightfoot. Went to law school with her, raised her hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if Blum were to be the only bidder for the casino, the politics, the perception is just terrible. There's also a perception out in the casino business and the gambling business that Neil Blum, rightly or wrongly, Blum's people deny that he has an inside because of that he's going to win it. So here today, the mayor announces that, as I'd heard earlier in the week, that she's going to delay this a couple of months. Now, some people who are connected to it say that there's some last-minute interest here. There's some other companies that are kicking tires, and that there's indeed at least one other competitor to Blum. But we don't know that because the mayor's not saying, and her people aren't saying. If the city's going to come up with the money it needs to pay pensions, the hundreds of millions of dollars that are counting on, this thing's got to work. And for it to work best, we need more than one bidder.
Greg Pratt, do you
competition gets you better.
If there is only one bidder right now, Greg Pratt, do you think there are going to be other bidders coming along? Hard Rock, Wynn, or is Chicago Casino just not a good bet?
That's a great question, and it's one of those things where Mayor Lightfoot had a real achievement in getting it passed and then getting them to amend it. It's still not perfect. I've been hearing from people with complaints about too many taxes, all of the issues that they raise. Whether or not a casino operator from somewhere else, somebody will come in, I don't know, but it probably is a good time for the mayor and her economic team to be making phone calls, and I would imagine that that's part of what the extra 2 months is about, is encouraging people that Chicago is a good investment, because there is a lot of questions about the city's just about the city's stability, that obviously the mayor's office has a lot of interest in tamping down, and that people would probably like to hear from them.
Well, Dion Miller, we know that people are eventually going to be gambling at the corner of Addison and Waveland as the city's Landmarks Commission approved the Cubs' plan for a sports book at Wrigley Field. And as I understand, would that be the nation's first gambling facility inside a professional stadium? And how would that work?
Well, I'm not totally sure how that would work, but I know the appetite is certainly there. I think things have changed a lot just in the last couple of years, and with DraftKings and with allowing people to bet real time on games, especially in the NFL. I mean, they have those bets that go on throughout the game that can change. You can do it the whole time, and to be able to walk up and do that at Wrigley, I think would be interesting. It'd be interesting to see it, to be that accessible to the fans right there. Not sure how much they would be betting on their home team for a couple of years. However, I do think the fans would be excited about having access to it.
It'd be a cash cow for the Cubs, you'd think, and maybe they'd afford to bring back one of the three marquee players that they lost. Mike Lowe, I remember going to the bleachers when I was young, and people would be betting on whether the ball would land on the mound when the pitcher walked off in between innings. Are you going to be at the Wrigley Sportsbook when it goes up?
To me, I am not a gambler. I don't like it. It's unseemly to do it, especially on your own sports teams. But obviously, I'm in the minority. We're seeing these ads during the broadcasts now. They're talking, as we talked about, putting the largest sports book in America at Wrigley Field, the cathedral of baseball. It just, to me, as a traditionalist, doesn't seem right. But I'm in the minority, and it's happening anyway. But I won't be.
I agree with you. I can't even do fantasy football because I don't want to. I don't want to have to ever bet against the Bears, even though it might be lucrative if I did at certain points.
Might be.
Greg Hines, Kirk Dillard talked to you this week and talked to a few other folks saying he's been fielding calls about jumping in the race for governor. Do you think this is serious, that there might be money behind a possible Dillard bid? And for our viewers, we should mention Dillard is a Republican, former state senator, and now chairman of the Regional Transit Authority.
Paris, I think it's potentially serious, but it depends. It depends on two things. One is what you mentioned, money. To win the Republican primary is going to take money. Whoever wins the Republican primary is going to go against billionaire Governor J.B. Pritzker, who's prepared to spend whatever it takes to win. So the big Republican money guys, particularly Ken Griffin, the hedge fund guy, really have to get behind a candidate and promise, you win, we're going to back you, for him to be interested. That's factor number one. Factor number two is Kirk Dillard is a moderate Republican. He was Jim Edgar's chief of staff. He comes from a party that in some ways doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't mean he can't win, but for him to win a Republican primary, he's pretty much got to be the only moderate against a field of Trump loyalists from downstate and be the only suburban reasonable sounding person. That might happen or it might not. What he said is, I'm going to wait and see. What he means is he's going to look for a while and see what shapes up.
See if someone writes a check with a bunch of zeros. I want to move on to sports. Dion, you just left game one of the Cubs-Sox series. Craig Kimbrell, who the Northsiders sent over to the Southsiders, didn't exactly have his A game today, did he?
He certainly did not. I would imagine there were a lot of emotions involved in that. Despite how short his stay was with the Cubs, and I think there was a lot there for everything that he went through personally during that time. Right. Like, I thought that he would, when he came in, I thought, well, this game is over. And clearly that is not what happened. So it's interesting. He's getting to know him a little bit more this year because of everything that he had gone through since he came here. We hadn't really interacted with him because of the pandemic and all of that. And talking to him at the All-Star game, getting to know him a little bit and his family and just how much it meant to him to be able to stay in our city and not have to move his family. And he seems very passionate about being in Chicago and being able to stay with the White Sox. I expected more from him today, but the emotions were very high, you guys. Like, I did not anticipate that, because here are Cubs fans coming back to Wrigley for the first time since that trade deadline dump and not even really knowing who a lot of these guys are. We're going to need a lineup card every time we go to Wrigley for a little while just to kind of know who these guys are. And that energy was there. It was alive. It was full. It was almost 40,000 people. It was one of the larger crowds that I've seen since they've been allowing more of a full capacity in there. And it was exciting. And I think it's going to be a pretty emotional weekend, though, just because it has been such a change of the guard. White Sox are the team to beat now, and they have every reason to have that kind of confidence.
And I know there's excitement about Eloy Jimenez and Luis Robert eventually coming back, and the Cubs, not a lot of W flags that they're going to wave over the next couple weeks at Wrigley, just white flags from the ownership. But they felt they did what they needed to do. Let's move on to the Bears. When you look at the quarterback situation and all the hype around Justin Fields, do you think that he's going to supplant Andy Dalton as a starting quarterback by week one, or is the plan on track to have Dalton be the starter?
The plan is on track for Dalton to be the starter. And one thing that I have noticed in a week of training camp, and granted, they have not had the same kind of defensive pressure that he'll face even in a preseason game. But Andy Dalton is a veteran quarterback, and it has been a long time since the Bears have had a quarterback that is so decisive and so confident in what he's doing. There's no hesitation. He's been there, done that. And Justin Fields even sees it, right? So Justin Fields' line this week was greatness doesn't happen overnight. And he understands where he's at. He's learning what he can. He's going to be great. But Andy Dalton's pretty good. Like, they're in good hands to start the season with a guy who knows what they're doing. We've had 4 years of Mitch Trubisky trying to throw things at the wall and figure it out. It's time to have somebody step in there behind center that the rest of the team also has confidence in and move that offense a little bit forward, give them that confidence. And then I imagine by, like, the middle of the season, they'll be clamoring for Justin Fields.
Or it could be like a situation in Kansas City where Alex Smith took them to the playoffs and then Pat Mahomes came in the next year and obviously was all world. Tell me about the moves that the Bulls made here. Are they on the level with Lonzo Ball and a couple of these other players? Are they now on the level of the Milwaukee Bucks?
Getting there. I think we have to see exactly how all the pieces come together. But gosh, wasn't it exciting? I mean, from Ayo Dosunmu, a hometown kid, being drafted, and then getting Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan, and it was like, whoa, what is going on? I mean, it was just really exciting to see them building, and again with their GM Arturas Karnisovas, like having that commitment to what he's doing and building and pushing forward and making those risky moves, but making Chicago exciting again and a topic of conversation. They are certainly not looked at this point as that lower level, just eking into the playoffs kind of team. They're looked at one that can compete and do it respectably. I think that's reason to be excited.
Take that next step and leave the Garpax era in the rear-view mirror. Dion, get home safely through that Cubs traffic. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks all of you for joining us. We are out of time, so my thanks to Greg Hines, Greg Pratt, Mike Lowe, and Dion Miller. And that is our show for this Friday night. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great weekend.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm named on the 2021 expertise list.